Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Rudy Caceres, and this is the return of SPSM Chat, the 3.0 crew. That's me, Rudy Caceres, and tonight our guest hosts will be Joelle Marie Nurse and Danielle Glick. They're going to talk about all the cool things that they're doing for 1 second, but for the entire hour, our guest of honor, Jack Encarnacio, JP Sorrow of the Lapsed Fan Wrestling Podcast. This is quite a treat, and this is pretty much for my own benefit. First and foremost, I hope everyone else gets something out of it, because this is going to be quite the treat. But I'm a huge pro wrestling fan, and I've been wanting to find a way to talk about it in a mental health context. So here we are, SPSM Chat, Suicide Prevention Social Media. And if you're watching this live, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on YouTube or Mixer, please let us know that you're here. Let us know that you care. If it's Sunday, it's SPSM Chat. So make sure to use the hashtag SPSM too and all the things. Let's go around. Let's bring up everyone on screen and let's have everyone introduce themselves.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go with Joelle.
Hi. Hi, my name is Joelle Marie. I am a certified peer specialist and a mental health consultant. I do a lot of work with homelessness issues. I do a lot of work with accessibility. And I'm really interested actually to be involved in this because when I first met my husband, and he was not yet my husband, he did share a lot of stories with me about pro wrestling. And it was something that I really had no experience, no exposure to. And a couple of our first dates were 2 wrestling matches. And I really saw how much it really got people going and how freeing it was. It was really enjoyable and really helped us connect and bond. So I'm really, really excited about this chat.
Cool. I'm just going to put the screen back on me real quick. For those who don't know, the title of today's show, Pain and Shame, the Suicidal Pro Wrestling Fan. That is pretty much what that is how you would distill pro wrestling in general, pain and shame. We're talking specifically about the pro wrestling fan, and my God, let's get back into the swing of things. Danielle Glick, why don't you introduce yourself? Hey, Danielle.
I forgot to unmute myself as always. Had to change my camera settings because I was delaying. Am I still delaying for everyone or no?
You're good.
Just go.
You're good.
Okay. I'm Danielle. I am a master's level clinician working with children and families. I'm like 3 or 4 months shy of being LPC and certified as a substance abuse and alcohol counselor, and I will be applying for my doctorate in clinical psychology this year, so that is really exciting. I am both an attempt survivor and a lost survivor of suicide, and I'm really excited to connect with the peeps we've got on the show because they're super awesome, and so are all of you watching.
Yes, and now we have 2 guests. There's 2 co-hosts for the Lapsed Fan Wrestling Podcast. Make sure, if you're not already, follow the Lapsed Fan on Twitter at the Lapsed Fan. They also have a Patreon, which we'll talk about at the end as well. Without further ado, let's start with Jack and JP. Without further ado, tell the whole world, the whole SPSM Chat galaxy, who is... We already got comments. That's great. Who is Jack Encarnacio?
I am the person whose face resembles the logo of our show on a black background. And I am also, longtime host with my longtime friend and co-host JP of the Lapsed Fan Wrestling Podcast. We identify why everything seems like it used to be better in our lives, including pro wrestling. And we set out empirical, objective proof points as to why just about everything used to be better. I think somewhere post social media, everything got worse. And so wrestling is very much included in that. And that's what we do.
Well, you came to the right show. And the thing about the Lapsed Fan is that it proves that not only did pro wrestling used to be better, life used to be better.
That's exactly correct.
As a matter of fact, life used to be good.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. But
Tell,
we speak to, we try to spend time honestly engaging with why nostalgia is such a powerful pulling force in everybody's life, and how, what it was about millennials that felt more connecting. What about society established more of a connection, the thrill of discovery that we don't have anymore when everything's at our fingertips, the sense that things weren't overproduced and sort of cynically worked backwards from groupthink and focus grouped interests, and just in general a feeling that, if you engaged with entertainment, it went through some kind of filter, and cream rose to the top. It's kind of like trying to put our finger on why, when we look at old wrestling, it brings forward emotions and investment that you just can't manage with current wrestling. The neon LED fake on, I mean, it's already fake. It doesn't have to feel fake on top of it. And that's what we do, Rudy, as you know. I mean, we say it's fake, it's bullshit, and we go from there.
well, speaking of moving on, let's get to our second guest. Tell the whole world, the whole SPSM Chat galaxy, we can't say solar system because that belongs to you, who is
Appreciate
JP
that.
Sorrow.
JP Sorrow is the other co-host of the Lapsed Fan who, honest to God, can't believe that we're here talking about this topic on a suicide prevention podcast. Like, if you told me this when we started the show, that we were going to help people, I would have been like, fuck off. No chance. Like, get out of town. Like, we're doing this for ourselves. And so I'm that guy, but I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to talk about why things used to be better. And yeah, I'm a little speechless, honestly, still, like, thinking about being here and being invited to do this.
No, that's totally fine. And let me give a little backstory. First off, hi, I'm Rudy Caceres. At Rudy Caceres on Twitter and all the other things. Been hosting this show since August of 2019. So hello to all of you. I've been listening to the Lapsed Fan Wrestling podcast for several years now, up until around the end of when you did the 30 years, 30 WrestleManias tour, as probably most of your listeners discovered you on YouTube. And I've been hooked since then. And it goes without saying that these podcast episodes, they're 6-7 hours long. Sometimes you'll do 4 or 5 part series, and you'll do these longer journeys covering entire spans of entire wrestling promotions and territories. So it's quite the investment. But what I learned from all the emails that you get, all the tweets, is that you have quite the following. A lot of your fans, they'll write to you talking about their deepest, darkest struggles, whether it be about self-harm, cutting, running away from home. We've had people who have gone homeless, people who have had terminal diseases and kicked out. We've had people who have attempted suicide. We've had people who have lost people to suicide, and just people who have just dealt with mental health issues, the stress their entire lives. So before we get into our first official question, I just wanted to ask you, Jack and JP, we'll go to Jack and then JP, why that is. Why the Lapsed Fan Wrestling podcast? Why do you attract such fans?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, first of all, the length has a lot to do with it. When you go long and you go hard, you occupy a particular... I'm not saying these things to get laughs out of him. He's just laughing. I assure you of that. We are not making light of this. But when it's that long, you wedge yourself into people's routines and almost their consciousness. When it's that long, that involved on a subject that is in such a sweet spot for them in terms of the outpouring of nostalgia it evokes, and the place, assuming they had a harmonious childhood of safety that old wrestling can put people into the frame of mind of. It's such a frivolous enterprise that you can't possibly have associated it with stress in your life. I mean, unless you're really weird, you associate it with, just frivolity and just having a good time. And to one of your co-hosts' points, just kind of letting loose and feeling like when wrestling's on the TV, you can sort of stand comfortably in judgment of something that's so phony and silly, but at the same time can achieve, when done well, bona fide high levels of drama and really suspend disbelief as well as any great movie with, the intense athleticism of, a Cirque du Soleil or something on that level. So I think when you do a show this long about something that is such a particular niche for people, they turn to you in times when they almost don't want to be alone with their own thoughts, or when they're performing rote tasks like going to the grocery store or doing a job that involves a lot of repetitive and manual labor where, you can sort of have something in your ear helping pass the time, running errands, mowing the lawn, shoveling snow, things like that. And I think when you do a show like ours that's so steeped in kind of the personality of the hosts and the personal reflections of the hosts, if you connect, as we found out a lot of fans do, with our memories and our explanations of why wrestling used to be so special, you come to be a resource for people when they're in situations in life that they don't want to be in, that they're trying to get through, and they can throw a podcast in their ear. And if it's long enough and engaging enough and they identify enough with the hosts, you can almost become their friend, or at least a resource for them in times of loneliness. And as we know, a prevailing feature of the millennial generation is loneliness, the feeling of loneliness. It is the age of loneliness. And we're here for you. And the shows are long enough and about something as kind of bread and circuses enough about wrestling that, we come to occupy, I think, a particular percentage of people's free time. It's kind of weird, but it also kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, I hear you all the way. I mean, that's very well said. I don't know how, JP, how are you going to top that? But if there's anything you can add, please share.
I mean, I can't. I'm not the wordsmith that Jack Encarnacio is. But I will say, I'll never forget, I think, at least if it wasn't the first email, it was at least the most memorable one for me that we got was a guy who he lived in California and he got in a car accident and he was pretty much immobile for quite a long time. He said he put on a lot of weight. He was depressed. He went through a miserable year, at least, if I remember correctly. And then he started listening to our show, and it feels weird for me to say that he listened to our show, and it started to make him feel better. He connected, he related, he is of the same time period as a fan, and then it became he gave himself a goal. He will set a regimen for himself that he would only listen to our show during when he was doing physical therapy or exercising or trying on that the hard work to get himself better. That's when he would listen to us, only then. And that got him feeling better, made him feel good, and he got healthy, and he literally walked through the doors of WrestleMania 30 play sign. Which one's that? 31 play sign? 31. 31. Yeah, so WrestleMania 31. And I was very moved by that, because I realized that we do have something. I mean, we have a very long, bordering on 20-year friendship that Jack and I have had. And honestly, one of the very few people that I even keep in touch with on a regular basis from college. And that kind of camaraderie, I think, adds to it and makes people feel kind of at home and makes people feel like they are not just listening to us, but involved with the conversation. And because we have the kind of relationship, I think I've talked about it on the show, where when we're together, our wives are miserable. And because they're like, these two guys are just being goof-offs and they're just saying a bunch of shit that makes no sense and making themselves laugh like they're children. And it's true. That's what happens. And I think I would guess that comes across. I mean, obviously comes across. It's the same thing what we do. We have our conversations on the podcast, and it makes you feel like you're with somebody, I would assume. It makes you feel like you're having these discussions and reminiscing on old times with friends. That's been another compliment that we've gotten from people over the years, is that it feels like we're having a discussion with old friends and it's not just me listening. And I'm like, that's so amazing. And yeah, I think the humor, I think the laughing is very important. And if I think one of our biggest criticisms from a lot of people is us laughing at our own jokes, but I think the laughing at our own jokes helps people laugh and helps people feel good. And so I say, fuck the haters.
I always say, if I can butt in, I don't want to go out of order here. Is that okay?
No, that's totally fine. We do have some questions I need to get into.
This will be really quick because you made the good point about laughing.
Yeah.
Eventually we came to an explicit rule. If you're the kind of person that does not laugh when they're in the presence of other people laughing, if you, almost like how a sneeze is contagious, or a yawn is contagious, I should say. Sneeze isn't so much contagious. A yawn is contagious. If you're not the kind of person who can't help but laugh when other people are laughing, we don't want you anywhere near our show, and you can go get fucked. And that's that. We are for people who belly laugh.
Yes.
And who are happy when they see other people laugh,
Yes.
instead of annoyed.
Absolutely. And before we get into our first question, let's give some quick shout outs. First on Twitter, hey, Jess Stolman Rainey, who is probably the biggest wrestling fan I know in the world of suicide prevention, outside of me, of course. Hey, Krista Marie, how are you doing? Studying psychology, human services and psychology at SC University. I love our academics. Hello, Peter Olson, how are you? I appreciate you, another wrestling fan. Okay, so let's see if we have any comments on social media. Patrick Doyle is a big fan of pro wrestling, so that is cool. You are in the right place. Miles Ross says TLF's girth cannot be understated. I would tend to agree.
Hey, that's what you guys get for inviting us on this show.
Yep.
That's totally fine. I love it. Bring it on. The first question of the night is, what are some attributes about pro wrestling that may help people struggling with suicidality? Let's start with Jack.
Wow. Well, I think because it's such a fantasy that it can't be mistaken for anything other than an escape. It can't be something that can cause you the kind of angst, or it shouldn't be something that can cause you the kind of angst as, like, real sports where you have rooting interest in your home team and can spiral into depression if they fail. A good wrestling fan kind of goes along for the thrill ride when it's done well, and laughs and jokes and cracks wise and rolls his or her eyes when it's done poorly, which it very, very often is. You have to have a steady, appreciation and tolerance level for poor performances and for hackneyed execution and for just amateur hour style acting and stuff. But I think more than anything, that's how it helps, is that it can't, unless you're of a particular obsessive nature, I don't think it's possible to associate wrestling with stress. I think it's a refuge, and because it's not real, there's not even real stakes. There's not even like an investment you can have in the outcome that's justified, or that can be anything more than just fun. You can't really gamble on it, so those issues don't come into play, which we know can be so destructive to mental health. You can gamble on it, but it's obviously ridiculous. And that's the best answer I can give. And for a lot of people who grew up in a certain generation when wrestling was really quite simple, and the thrill they got out of wrestling was really quite simple, old wrestling will always spark those memories and recall warm feelings that you didn't know you had when you go back and watch the stuff. We talk about that all the time. Like, there's stuff we don't even remember we remember when we go back and watch old wrestling.
I mean, I think part of the fantasy part too that he was talking about is some of that fantasy part can be like a stress reliever and helpful in a way. If you look at some of the late 90s stuff, you have Stone Cold Steve Austin beating up his boss on a weekly basis. I mean, that's that's the American dream right there. I mean, to be able to beat up on your boss on TV would be so many people's dream, and you're able to live that out through this guy and through these characters and stuff like that. And I think the fantasy part of it is definitely a huge part. The escapism of it is a huge part. And I mean, well, back in the day, I would say the relatability with some of the wrestlers. I think that helps. I think when you have a wrestler that you can agree with and kind of follow in terms of whether they're real or fictional beliefs, you can that can be helpful.
Okay, so let's move on to Joelle, and we have there's 3 other questions after that, so I want to make sure everyone gets time to speak. I just want to say, Joelle, my wife, the first wrestling show I took her to was New Japan Pro Wrestling in Long Beach. This was like right before like the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega left and Cody, so it had like the full stack roster. It even had Scott Norton signing autographs in front of 2 people. So,
oh God!
So I'm glad she stuck with me. She went with me to the SmackDown premiere on Fox at Staples Center. That's where I had my Laps fan shirt and sign. So
yes,
I appreciate her doing this for me, for being game. So Joelle, let's have it. Let's put the question back up on screen.
Yes.
So
what are some? Okay, sorry, I always have to double check the question. I think it just. For me, what I'd see is just community and I guess, the escapism and being able to remove yourself from what's going on outside. And, particularly with this podcast that Rudy's talked about and, having something present in your life that doesn't come with all the stressors of necessarily of stressful interaction that is just constantly there. That you feel you can rely on to be there is really helpful. And, when there is an interest that's shared, ultimately, organically, like support comes from communities. And I think that's always beneficial.
Danielle?
I always forget to unmute myself. What are some attributes? I think that going back to our earlier conversation, I had a conversation with you, Rudy and Joelle earlier today, and I think that it's community. It's the fact that you're with other people who have common interests that can kind of help you distract maybe from the suicidal feelings and thoughts that you're having. And I don't even know how to form my thoughts right now, to be completely honest with you. I've had a very, very long day and I'm pretty burnt out. But I just feel like even if it wasn't wrestling, if you belong to any type of community, you find ways to connect with people that are just beneficial to making you feel better, even if it's momentary, long lasting. Like, I'm part of the heavy metal community, and I know that there are going to be a network of people who always have my back, no matter where I am, what place, what time. And I'm going to assume that that's something that translates over to the wrestling community as well. So I think that that's beneficial because it's knowing that you have a network and support that always is just going to have your back. I think that's all I've got for you right now.
Well, thank you for that. Let's get to question number 2, and that would be, what are some, I beat Krista to it. That's Krista, put on the question. Sorry, I shouldn't be fighting with you. What are some potential negatives about pro wrestling that may harm someone's mental health? Let's go back to Jack.
Being socially ridiculed for being emotionally invested in something so completely ludicrous and foolish and phony. That kind of takes some getting used to. That's what I would say is, constantly having to answer the barrage of questions from people who don't understand why this isn't tantamount to a movie and that you can't, just accept a fictionalized context, and you have to be obsessed with whether this is actually people trying to hurt each other or not. I think anyone who grew up a wrestling fan in the playground had to deal with that. A lot of kids get into wrestling at a certain age, and sort of like when they stop believing in Santa, there's a certain age where people are still watching wrestling.
I mean, if I could interrupt for 1 second, it still happens today.
Oh,
It
yeah.
happens to me because I go, it happens about our podcast. People will say, I say, oh yeah, I do a weekly podcast. Oh my God, that's amazing. I want to listen. What's the name of the podcast? I said, oh, it's called The Labs Fan. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, what's it about? What's it about? Pro wrestling. Oh.
Yes. And wrestling is so contemptuous of its fans that it deserves that negativity. It deserves that ridicule. There's a bereft of respect because it's such a blatant put on. But when you go sort of beyond that surface level, and you kind of realize that like all these guys are really doing is exploiting human nature. They're drawing out of people, sort of what makes them tick. They're making them boo and cheer and feel invested, even if they know it's not real, on the basis of understanding their psychology and understanding what the hot buttons are they can press to engage them emotionally. The best do it that way. And they express themselves on the microphone in a way that you can believe in, a way that you can believe they would, almost they're winking at you, like they may be saying scripted lines, but they're coming from a true place. Those are the best guys. But yeah, as far as it becoming a negative force in someone's life, that's what I would say is the social ridicule that you have to deal with. Pretending you don't watch it, that's always fun. Acting, in a group of contemporaries like you don't understand anything about wrestling, and bemusedly listening to like the 2-minute conversation about it as they make many errors in understanding about how it works. I mean, it's just we talk about it all the time. We read articles that are contemporaneous with these old wrestling shows we review and recap, and the mainstream media's take on wrestling. It's just unbelievable. Like these guys, they go to these arenas, they set up shop, they kill themselves in this ring, they put it all on the line to perform and entertain people. And the whole article is about whether people in the audience think it's real.
Yeah,
and how silly that is.
I hear you, and I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of the podcast is when you'll read these news article write-ups on these momentous events that like mean so much to us, and all they could talk about in the news article is just how phony baloney bullshit it all is.
I mean, the one of my favorites is we did this show on the NBC primetime live special, the main event, where there was the Hulk Hogan Andre the Giant rematch, and like here it is. This is the most highly rated television program of all time. 30 million people watched this show, and even then, this is like the height. You can't get any higher in terms of mainstream notoriety and being popular. And all the news articles that we read were about it's fake and how it's not real programming. And it's like this is all. It's like, oh, you didn't get up to NBC's standards. You're 1 point off, so you guys suck. And it's that yeah. So that's the news outlets always will do their first thing. I mean, I do that character as a joke, but it's very obvious that there is somebody in every newspaper who's like, no, look, I'm not going to take this stuff seriously. You're going to write about this, and you're going to remind everyone that it's fake. Tell everybody that it's a carnival. Do not let this don't let people get away with enjoying this stuff. And it's so stupid. It's like, let people enjoy what they want to enjoy. If it's what they like, let them like it. Like, why does every notion is, hey, you know what, this pro wrestling company came into town and they sold out this building. They're bringing in 25,000 people to come see this. They made millions and millions of dollars, but don't forget they're fake. What they're doing is not real. And so it shouldn't be taken seriously,
Yeah, no, I love it when you do that. I also appreciate greatly when you two do your Boston accents. Like Joelle previously lived in Somerville, so I'm sure she can appreciate that.
There we go.
So let's get to Joelle. Before I let you answer, Joelle, I just want to give a quick shout out to our MVP of the night, Patrick Doyle. Says that he proposed in Dallas at WrestleMania a few years ago. Hey, I was there. How could she say no? She's so happy. He's also, my son is so deep into heavy metal Norwegian, so fan for you, Danielle. There you go. Okay, so let's get back to you, Joelle. What are some potential negatives about pro wrestling that may harm someone's mental health?
So I think definitely, what was mentioned. I think anytime people need to hide who they are, hide things that are important to them, is not only not only passively, but even actively. Like if you're in a conversation, you have to be like, oh no, yeah, haha, I don't know much about that. Like that's hard. That can feel painful. Like even if it's only wrestling or only a hobby, it can take a toll. And I also think that, in terms of the pro wrestlers themselves, anything that is, you center your identity on so much about like incredible physical performance. And if you get injured or if that's suddenly taken away from you, that takes an incredible toll. So I think that that's probably one of the many reasons why pro wrestlers are at risk for suicide and a lot of other issues. Their identity is heavily focused on performance, and it can be very quickly taken away.
What say you, Danielle?
Oh, look at that. I remember to unmute my mic. I'm just going to jump off what has been already said, because I feel like that is the biggest part of the issue, is that being fake. I know that I'm a mental health professional, and sometimes I have to hide what I'm going through because there's a stigma around mental health professionals having mental health issues. And I feel like no one should ever really have to hide, especially in a community where people, are there to support one another. I like to see people being their authentic selves. And that to me is part of what is so great about having these types of communities, is that you've got people supporting you for who you are. So there's really nothing further that I can really expand on that would be of any value to this conversation, because it's already been said by all of you guys. But also, hi, Patrick.
Did you want to add anything else, Joelle?
Sorry, I had the mute this time. Actually, to the first thing about benefits, I do think that being able to be in a crowd of people and just like scream excitedly about something or really get into something in a passionate way in a crowd really helps to release maybe some pent up angst or stress, and really communicate with people in ways that is not usually socially acceptable. So like when I've gone to music festivals and things like that, you can scream and yell and be kind of almost primal in a way that is not acceptable, like on the street or in a coffee shop. And that's been a really great experience for me. So I think that is also an added benefit. And anytime you can follow someone like an emotional story or journey, whether it's real or not, whether it's scripted or not, that's always just really good to be invested in that and to have something to look forward to day after day and week after week. So if you're feeling really shitty, like there's something else to look forward to someone else's progress, to a story's progress.
See, and you just explained exactly why I love going to metal shows, because it's a place where I feel probably similar to someone who goes to see, wrestling live, is a place to get out what I'm feeling in an acceptable place. Like, it's okay for me to punch someone if I'm in a mosh pit. I don't want to hurt anybody, but it's a good place for me to get that out. The same way someone gets to like cheer and scream when they're at a wrestling match, So I love what you just said, because I literally physically couldn't form the words to say it any better.
Okay, so
actually, if I could add just one more thing to the
sure.
the negative thing I was thinking about. I said there's one thing that actually repeatedly occurs on the negative side, and how it can cause negative reactions is really it's gotten better over the last couple of years, but wrestling is known for its mockery, its making fun of underrepresented communities, crazy unnecessary stereotypes of Black characters and people of Asian descent, and gay characters, disabilities, the whole thing. Like I can't imagine how that. I mean, it's like they want to be appealing to only straight white men at times, and again they've been kind of getting better. They've tried to change their ways a little bit, but in some ways they're they still do the same exact shit over and over again. And I can imagine how that could be extremely stressful and disappointing if you are a fan and if you are a member of one of these different communities that gets ridiculed or mocked or stereotyped. It can be painful. And yeah, and unfortunately wrestling is very notorious for doing that.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight a couple of comments. First, Jess Stolman Rainey and Carly Larson, who previous guests on SPSM Chat, making some great comments about the also the rampant racism and ethnocentrism.
Yeah.
But Jess says, I think it is one of the few places, pro wrestling, where hypermasculinity gets performed with some range of emotion. Anger is definitely centered, but I've probably seen more muscly dudes cry in wrestling than anywhere else. And I know, Jack, you've spoken on this. What are your views on men crying in wrestling?
Nate.
Yeah, we know who, right? The chief utilizers are. The problem is with wrestlers, they're lifelong emotional manipulators. They, if nothing else, understand how to evoke the reaction they desire at the moment they desire. And what's always misappreciated about wrestling is how good they are at that. And this idea that they need a gullible public to perform that. And that's not true. And the more you learn about these guys and these women's lives, they're manipulative to everybody. They carry those abilities to manipulate into their personal lives to constantly try to line up a payday or get an edge, or they just basically enjoy feeling like they can control other people's thoughts and emotions at a given time. And they're trained in that, and they're great at that. They're some of the best people, I would argue, walking the planet at that. And because they have this kind of imprimatur of being less serious as entertainers and performers, people underestimate their ability to do that, which only strengthens their ability to manipulate. So a lot of times when you see crying in wrestling, it really is just another device employed to evoke a particular reaction. Some wrestlers learn to cry because they want the moment that they're performing to feel momentous. And I would probably say that they get so good at that they actually do cry. But it doesn't come from a place of an outpouring of emotion as much as it comes from a place of, I really need to create a moment here, and so I'm going to cry. And I think wrestlers are good at forcing themselves to do that. I mean, if you ever watch Total Divas on E!, which is a reality style show that follows the women of the WWE and in their personal lives as they go on vacation and struggle with relationships and this and that. I mean, they make each other cry every 15 minutes on that show. It's basically a show where they talk about their issues until one of them cries and apologizes. Mm-hmm. And I just can't buy that as reflective of what most people go through when they're brought to tears. It seems to be more performative and just part of a life of manipulation. I'm not casting judgment on it, but I'm not afraid to call it that either.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that women fans would they be more attracted to male characters who do more crying and bear their emotion than men, as you know, in a hyper masculine sports entertainment vehicle like pro wrestling, crying is seen as weakness, but if a woman's watching, and it seems that there are increasingly more with the whole women's evolution, do you think that has an impact? Do you think you see like do you believe, let me phrase this right. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like women, the increase of women viewing pro wrestling, is there a need for more bare emotions in pro wrestling, or does that do more harm than good?
Yeah, I think the female wrestling consumer, first of all, they've increased because the women are being taken more seriously and are being spotlighted in a way that's more credible and in keeping with how the men are portrayed, and that's going to attract female viewers and women and little girls and parents, enthusiastically letting their little girls watch the show. But also, I mean, girls going crazy for guy wrestlers is as old as wrestling. I mean, the screaming at the top of the lungs of the teenage fans, Beatles style, at the Von Erich shows in Dallas in the 80s. If they're hot, and if they also project a certain degree of chivalry and a certain degree of, a little softness, a little softness in terms of, being a little emotionally vulnerable, showing a little bit of actual caring and not just a cyborg-like desire to kill, women can get into male wrestling characters. That's my observation, having watched wrestling all these years and trying to identify the qualities of the male wrestlers that invest women in them.
Okay, so let's get to question 3, and I want to keep this short because we've already talked about this. So, literally, let's just keep this a few sentences because I really want to make sure we give enough time to the 4th question. Okay, so how might participating in an online pro wrestling community help with social isolation? Let's go with Jack very quickly.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's something that can and allows you to be completely immersed in the world if you choose to be. And if you're lonely, wrestling can be your friend. And there are a lot of other people who are lonely that love wrestling, and they can be your friend too. And through podcasts, you can get to know them, hear them, listen, and identify with them.
JP?
Yeah, I would say I agree with that to a degree. I also think that the online pro wrestling community can also be some of the nastiest motherfuckers out there, and they're gonna be the first people to go down your throat. So it just depends. I mean, in terms of online community, I know, not that. I mean, if you're socially isolated, I don't know. Sometimes I really feel that online communities are and sometimes they promote that kind of isolation, and I don't agree with that. I would feel better for a pro wrestling fan to go out and go see a show, even if it's a small, crappy show at their Lions Club featuring 100 people in a ring made out of cardboard. I feel like the community aspect of it is so important to that, and you can. I'm not trying to bash any kind of online community, but it just I see kind of the isolation being exaggerated with some online communities. There's a lot of negativity.
What say you, Danielle? What say you, Joelle?
So I have to agree. There are definitely some online communities that are really harsh and that are just not helpful for any kind of socialization or connecting. And there are some that just are. They're, really niche communities like a wrestling interest community or an art interest community, bicycling interest community. And I've found some of these communities with particular interests, they actually open the door to have conversations around these interests, which give a certain language to talk about other things and make connections like that. And I found that through actually being a peer specialist. If I talk to somebody about something they're very, very interested in, it can give them a way to talk through that interest about needing support, about things that are going on with them. And it's definitely not going to be in every online community. So you have to be very careful about what you choose and where you go, but they can be beneficial.
Danielle?
Okay, so obviously I think everyone's figured out that I'm the least wrestle knowledgeable out of the bunch tonight. But I do really think that online communities can be very, very beneficial in a variety of different ways. And an online community is actually how I started to venture into the mental health field myself. Looking for support, you have an area in which you don't actually have to use your real name and gain support and get education from other people who have been through the things that you're struggling with or that you want to learn about. And I think that that's really cool because it gives people a place to, have a head start until they're comfortable enough to either come public with whatever it is that they're looking for, or, actually going and seeking treatment, face to face with someone. So I think there are a lot of benefits. And like Joelle had mentioned, there's a lot of different areas. So you could find support within the wrestling community, the art community, the metal community. And so I think it's just, it's a personal comfort, because I think it's just, I think it's a good starting point, and it allows you to connect with and make friends with people that you would never have connected with or made friends with in a million years otherwise. There's people that I've connected with in communities for addiction, for example, that I still keep in touch with to this day, that I met over 6 years ago, who have been the biggest supports, not only personally in getting through certain things, but in pushing forward with my career. So
question number 4, and this is a doozy. Been waiting for this. What effects do pro wrestling suicide have on its fans? And before I let Jack get going, a comment I see repeatedly in the comments across social media, and of course we are going to mention this, by far, even above the Von Erich suicide, by far the most high-profile suicide is Chris Benoit. It was a double murder suicide, so no sympathy there for him. Of course, it was also, he had CTE, which is something that happens from getting a lot of concussions. So he had a lot of chair shots to the head and a lot of other moves with traumatic brain damage. So let's get to Jack. With that in the air, for those who don't know, so if you see anyone making comments about Chris Benoit, that is what he did. Let's go with Jack.
Well, I think it reminds fans that there really is no life after a career in wrestling that can replace the charge and the high that performing for live wrestling crowds gives to a person. And they have to have a damn good sense of self and confidence in their ability to transition out of the wrestling life, that they don't hang on a bit too long and get a bit too used to pills and a bit too used to substances that take the edge off, get them up, get them down, get them going, get them slowed, and all the other stressors. I mean, I basically think a wrestling suicide, when I think of a wrestling suicide, it's a testament to how ill-prepared wrestlers are to live any other life than that of a wrestler. It equips you with a unique set of skills that you would think would transcend, but you actually have to hide the fact that you were involved in wrestling on your resume for the most part. There have been no shortage of broadcasters, for instance, who had nothing to do with pretending to fight in the ring, who admittedly don't mention, talk about, tout the fact that they were involved with wrestling when they're trying to get work elsewhere because they think it would disadvantage them. And when I think of a wrestler who kills himself, I think of a wrestler who really had nothing else going after the lights went off and the injuries piled up and they had nothing left to give the wrestling fan. And what the hell what the hell use does society have for a washed up pro wrestler? I'll tell you, none. And they have no money either. And so, yeah, sometimes they end up killing themselves.
So let me ask you, Jack, what did the Chris Benoit murder suicide, what did that have an effect on you?
It was at first it touched off this thought that because he was respected and gave off to at least his more casual acquaintances no indication that he might have this mania inside of him to strangle his son and his wife and then hang himself by his weight machine in his home one day, that this could be lurking in the bodies and in the recesses of the minds of way more wrestlers than we appreciate. That was my first thought, that if Chris Benoit can go to this level of atrocity and show no outward signs that people would necessarily pick up on other than people extremely close to him, then, who's to say that this isn't the beginning of a wave of wrestlers who commit atrocities because of the subtle cumulative effects of brain damage. We'd seen so many football players do self-harm, commit suicide in the throes of CTE, which you mentioned, Rudy. And so that was my first kind of fear, and the first twist in my gut was that, wrestlers are going to be doing this now instead of just harming themselves before they get old enough to kill their families too. And fortunately, that really did not turn out to be the case. There weren't a lot of, for lack of a better term, copycat instances, if any, within pro wrestling. But, with the recent suicides of Brian Lawler and Ashley Massaro, I tend to think that we might be headed into another wave of people that the wrestling business has no use for anymore and who end up addicted to opiates and the such, who might, while not, kill their families, be driven to kill themselves when the phone stops ringing with bookings.
What say you, JP?
How it affects the fans, I think that in some ways, especially when there is, a lot of people that have talked about, especially with the Chris Benoit thing, as as being a reason they stopped watching or whatnot, and even the decline in the world class era with the Von Erichs. I can't help but think that fans, when dealing with the suicide of a wrestler, are dealing with the suicide of a superhero, and also dealing with the fact that maybe subconsciously they are realizing that they are somewhat responsible, because as a fan, you want more. I mean, the reason Chris Benoit's brain was so whacked out and destroyed is because people wanted more violence in wrestling during the time period when he was strongest. And the only way you can be more violent is to be more violent, provide that violence as quote unquote safely as possible to please these fans. But at the same time, look what it did to him, that and everything else. There's a responsibility that fans have to take. I mean, we've touched upon it in a joking manner, but at the same time, I've always felt that there really is, because these guys wouldn't be doing it if we didn't demand it as fans. Mick Foley jumping off of a 20-foot cage doesn't happen because he wants to do that. He's doing that because we demand him to do that in some way. And all these guys, and that movie, The Wrestler, it rings true, because these guys are, once they're out of wrestling, they're treated as jokes. And especially in this day and age, when your bodies get so beaten up from doing these insane moves, you don't have people like a Nick Bockwinkel, who was able to wrestle way beyond his prime and survive because he didn't hurt himself. And Bockwinkel could live a normal life, like there was, or as much as we know, live a normal life. He didn't commit suicide. He didn't kill anybody that, we know about. And it's that kind of thing. Like, unfortunately, the way the business has evolved over the last 20 years, I think it's going to hurt people more in the long run. I think now they're a little bit safer and whatnot, especially, with like, steroids and stuff like that and other whatnot. But it's, I can't imagine. I mean, I would imagine that's why people drop out of, watching wrestling after a while, because it hurts, and we're somewhat responsible for it.
Well put. I want to add one more thing. JP puts his finger on something that I think is the height of irony in wrestling, and that is that because the conflict is not real, because these people are not trying to hurt each other in the ring, what that does is just make them go even further in risk-taking to get people invested in what they're doing as special. So because everyone acknowledges it isn't real, what that basically ends up doing is creating this can you top this environment where people end up taking 3 times the real risk any real fighter, as in a boxer or an MMA fighter, ever would, and end up way more hurt.
Joelle?
I definitely think, sort of going off of what JP said, is that people really do pressure who they idolize. And they, even if they understand that they're doing extreme physical feats, they don't want to really think about that. So they don't want to think about like kind of the brutal physical pain and damage that they're going through. And when somebody does take their own lives, it's suddenly the curtains being drawn back. And depending on how important wrestling is to you and, how it's helped you or how much it has taken up your life, that can have a very intense effect on you. Is that your whole community, or is that just something you like go and check out every once in a while? So I definitely think that depending on where you are and how important it is to you, that can have a drastic effect on you.
Yeah, and I have a couple things that I wanted to say. First off, I think it's very interesting. Wrestling deaths happen all the time. It's kind of died down in recent years. It used to happen a lot in the mid to late 2000s, where it just seemed like it was every month, usually because of a history of steroids and drug abuse. But for the bigger wrestlers like the Eddie Guerreros and the Owen Harts and what have you, they would have these tribute shows. Like they'd take over the entire episode. Whenever a wrestler dies by suicide, that does not happen. you, except I guess Chris Benoit, but that's a whole weird other thing that I don't want to get into. So yeah, that is interesting, and the whole like suicides in wrestling, they've been married for quite a while. You can go on Wikipedia and look up suicides in wrestling. It's been happening a long time. It's just that it can be for different reasons as society grows up. But what do you have to say about that, Jack and JP? This whole it's not, I guess it's not a surprise because we still talk about suicide in hushed tones, but there's something. I guess it's like not wanting to admit complicity into suicide. Why you don't have tribute shows for someone who died by suicide, no matter how much of an amazing performer they once were.
Yeah, yeah. I guess they really don't, huh? I mean, they certainly have paid tribute in terms of like those still graphics to people who've killed themselves. Like I remember Rick Wilson, Renegade, and stuff. I don't know. It probably has something to do with that complicity dynamic. Um, I remember when Mike Von Erich, or when we were talking about Mike Von Erich, the second Von Erich boy to die from that family via suicide, just how different the tone was around his funeral, and how different the tone was around the level of acknowledgement that the world class wrestling organization would allow of his death on the air compared to his older brother, who had died ostensibly of a drug overdose in a hotel in Tokyo in 1984 and was just lionized like you would not believe. Now, of course, the drug element of it remains disputed and was very hush hush at the time, and it was basically assigned to basically some kind of cardiac issue that he had that caused his sudden death at such a young age. But yeah, I think there is a certain slotting that goes on in terms of which deaths reach the level of public lionization and which ones don't. That said, I think basically the depressing truth is if you were a big star, they'll do a big tribute show for you. And if you weren't that big of a star, whether you killed yourself or not, they're not going to do a particular tribute show for you. It's in direct proportion to how much you did for the enterprise. And, when Jimmy Snuka passed away, despite essentially in his later years having been found to have been complicit, if not outright guilty in a murder in 1982 or 4, when he was in the WWF, they just still went whole hog with a tribute to him, even though in his final days he was back on trial due to new evidence being uncovered on his prior acquittal on this murder that, essentially everyone in the wrestling community kind of acknowledged he had something to do with of an ex-girlfriend. So, wrestling will really, really introduce the most warped set of priorities and the most warped set of sort of qualifications for tribute that you have ever seen. It comes down to whether you did anything for me or not.
Yeah.
That's the measure as to whether you get acknowledged and lionized.
I think too that there's also I get the vibe, there's a lot of dated mentalities in that instead of like, feeling empathy for the person who committed suicide, they're like, you killed yourself, and I don't think that's fair. I think the people commit suicide in many ways, led more tragic of an end than someone like an Eddie Guerrero, because Eddie Guerrero wasn't, he wasn't feeling miserable at the end. He was ready to go. He was ready to give it another go, or so they say, and he was okay. It was just complications from other things. But these people who commit suicide didn't. They're missing something, and it's sad that a community that makes this statement of like being a family business, that they would all of a sudden forget their family and not, but that's what happens. I mean, you can't I understand the reality speaking, you can't take care of everybody at all the time, but the people, especially the more recent suicides, I mean, they deserve more than just a little graphic saying, they were born here and they died here.
Yeah, no, and all great points tonight. We're going to get into final thoughts. Before I do, just want to thank everyone on Twitter. I guess we're in overtime right now, but thank you to everyone who participated in the Twitter chat. Thank you everyone who's commented on Facebook and YouTube as well. let's get into final thoughts. We'll go to Joelle, Danielle, and then we'll wrap up with Jack, JP, and then, of course, we'll end with me, because of course. So final thoughts, Joelle.
I actually don't really have final thoughts right now. I don't have anything that could really be put succinctly. Just community is always good.
Danielle.
So I'm kind of at the same place where Joelle is. I've just been really interested in listening to everything that's being shared tonight by our wonderful guests. And I too agree that it's just awesome that people have this kind of community and support, whether it's online or in person. Because I think that sometimes things get lost in translation with sports in general. Like, I know sports just go for me. So thank you guys for providing a safe place for people in your community, and to all the people who have, found a place and an ear and a friend in your community. Just keep moving forward.
Any new celebrities, Danielle, that you might be dating?
All of them, every single one of them. You can imagine it. They're my boyfriend. I got
Final
you.
thoughts, Jack?
That's interesting. Wow. I had no
Yeah,
idea.
Danielle and Aaron Carter were having a thing. So.
Oh, is that right?
We're not having a thing. I went to an Aaron Carter concert, and it looked like he was going to kiss me in a photo, and everyone just kind of took it there. So that happened, and then I got into Post Malone, so apparently he's my boyfriend now. But maybe I'm single, maybe I'm not. No one will ever know.
Oh man.
Okay.
It's been great being here. Thanks, guys, for letting us bloviate and go on and on about this foolishness that is wrestling. Final thoughts. I mean, you called the episode "Shame and Pain," Rudy. I mean, you should feel shame if you're a wrestling fan because it's phony and fraudulent.
Camera caught me itching my ear.
There's no shame.
Oh, I thought that was a pop for my joke. I'll say it again. All right, I'll say it again.
Do it.
Shame and pain. You should feel shame if you're a wrestling fan because it's phony and fraudulent, and there are real things you could get interested in.
That's right.
And the shame comes from the fact that there's pain watching wrestling because so often they don't do what you want them to do and force you to watch it anyway. But when it's done well, it provides a unique charge, a charge so unique that people reach for it over and over and over again. And that's what we're here to do, is unpack why that works and why other stuff doesn't, and have fun with the whole goddamn gamut of bad to good. So if that's your bag, we're here.
Would you say that wrestling fans need the pain?
Wrestling fans Wrestling fans come to accept, and I got to turn this over to JP because I haven't heard anyone be more eloquent on how necessary pain is to existence than him. But I will say that, yes, wrestling fans are some of the most hip to the fact that existence is pain.
That's right.
And to avoid pain is to avoid life.
Ooh.
Go ahead, JP.
JP.
The necessity of pain, because you do not recognize the good in your life otherwise. You need the pain to see the good. If you only had good, you wouldn't know what was good. So you need the pain. Wrestling fans need lulls in the entertainment because they need it to recognize what was good when it used to be better. That's what I say.
You want to tell them a little something, boss, about, sort of people's sense of what they deserve and how.
Well, I mean, if we're going to get down to it, people don't know what they deserve. People don't know what they want. They need to be shown. Heard it like, no, it's off. I can't do that on this show. Come on, man. I can't do that here.
Are you saying that's a work?
Wait, what?
Hey, we're live, pal.
No, what are we missing?
I don't know, right? Can we try that again? I do want to say I've loved. I appreciate being on here, number one, and it absolutely humbles me that Jack and I can be two just goofballs and basically share our wrestling conversations for the world, and to get a reaction that not only are we actually funny, not just to ourselves, and entertaining, not just to ourselves, but that what we do helps people. It is eternally humbling to know that we can affect people, help people in any way, and in a weird way, not even trying to do it, but to know that we're there for people, to know that we've been told that we are voices for certain people, and that we are an open, inclusive forum, despite our opinionated natures about everything. And so, yeah, I'm glad to do that, glad to share that, and glad to be here.
Does Lapsed Vince have any final words?
Okay, hold on. It's hard for me not to get dark when you get into that voice, but I'll just say what we provide here for the fans is quality, timely entertainment. Ooh, the dog does not like Vince.
If you want to get a dog barking, pretend to be
Yes,
Vince McMahon.
you want to get a dog to react.
And his sociopathic shit will get any dog barking in any neighborhood in this fucking country, because there is no one that takes it to as dark a place, that speaks to the core of humanity, that speaks to what's left when we strip away all pretense, than Lapsed Vince McMahon. Go ahead.
The thing is, as I've said before, the people don't know what they want. The people don't know what they need. I know that, and I'm not going to give it to them. I'm going to give them what I want. What I want, damn it. And what I want is the right damn thing. All right, you can get the fuck out of my office, damn it.
Okay, so that's a thing. I mean, people are going to have to check out the podcast to get all these little inside jokes. Like, I can't go over all of them. And you don't want to just listen to the podcast for free. That's what bitches do. You want to go to patreon.com/thelapsefan. Ain't that right, Jack and JP?
Yeah, we live in a world where people have convinced themselves that the platforms are going to reward them for handing them free content. Okay, there was a time when you had to pay talent to have a fucking business based around their content. That era is over. The people who control the pipes now control your worth. And you can make YouTube videos into the ether all you want of your kid opening fucking Fabergé eggs with little toys in them. But there will come a day when your daddies decide to unplug the spigot and you won't make any money off of it anymore. But forums like Patreon allow people to say, you know what? If the content people are taking the time to make makes a difference in my life, I might just pay for it. What an old-fashioned idea. I don't know what country you think this is. This is America. We judge if something is worth it based on whether it makes money. And so, if you think The Lapsed Fan is worth it, go to Patreon and pay us money so we can continue doing it. And that feeds the energy that's required to do a show like this.
Don't do it for you. Don't do it for us. Do it for you. Do it because it satisfies that hunger and pain inside you, because you know it's the right thing. That's the reality.
Thank you so much. Lastly, I just want to say, how do you get us to get sponsored by Blue Chew?
Well, my friend, I think Blue Chew is a male enhancement pill. So you need an audience.
It's a chewable.
It comes in chewable form with the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis. And for some reason, they just can't stop throwing advertising money at people that have a connection to the wrestling audience. I don't know. I guess you just need an audience that goes soft.
I thought we were going to do about toys.
Well,
What's that? I didn't hear what you said. What?
We had a conversation with the president of AAS over Twitter that we were going to do adult toys sponsorship, something.
There you go.
I was just talking about the American Association of Suicidology, but that's a conversation for a different day. Thank you so much, everyone. Go check out the.
You asked about Blue Chew. What the hell?
There we go. Well, we'll talk offline about that. SPSM Chat, sponsored by Boner Pills. That's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much, Jack Arcanarcio and JP Sorrow, for being on SPSM Chat, suicide prevention, social media. I appreciate you all. Our guest next week is another one of Danielle's people, so go check that out, Jennifer Sterling. What can we expect next week, Danielle?
I'm expecting a lot of movement therapy advice. See, I'm doing some movement therapy right now.
Yeah.
I think that it'll be another interesting conversation that we're going to have.
Yes.
I don't think that a lot of people even know that movement therapy is a type of therapy. And there's like a lot of areas in my field that are becoming more and more popular that can help people specifically when they're coping with suicidal ideation. And I'm excited that we could be those people who bring that to people who are unaware of that.
Only on SPSM Chat will you go from pro wrestling to movement therapy. That's going to do it.
Wrestling is movement therapy.
It is.
Ooh,
There you
it's
go.
well, it's certainly not ballet.
Well played.
Yes, but if there's anything we should know, it's that the hazards are real. Until next Sunday,
That's not correct.
hold your
Okay.
pitties close.